The Pokemon Company just announced that they are working on a game that is still in development that I think is going to change the way that Pokemon operates forever. Now, when I say that it'll change Pokemon forever, you're probably thinking that I'm only talking about competitive Pokemon. But actually, I think that this game is going to forever change not only competitive Pokemon, but the single player experience as well. Every year on Pokemon Day, there is some kind of broadcast normally announcing upcoming titles and things that the Pokemon Company is working on. This year is the 29th anniversary, and many people were really eager and excited for Pokemon Day because there's basically been almost no news, not only about Generation 10, but also about the upcoming game Pokemon Legends ZA. Going into the broadcast, myself and I would guess most of the fandom were expecting that these two games would be the focal point. However, what we were not expecting was the release of a new title called Pokemon Champions. This title was frankly completely unexpected, which is funny especially because it could end up being one of the most impactful Pokemon titles of all time. So what is Pokemon Champions? Well, we don't know that much about it, but we have a good general idea. Effectively, as best that I can tell, this is a modern Pokemon battle simulator. One of the first questions that you might have is like, why does a battle simulator matter? Like maybe you're somebody who just plays the single player campaign and you're like, yeah, I mean, I don't really care about battling, so like it doesn't matter to me, and you're about to click off this video. But you shouldn't, because it actually does matter to you. Pokemon Champions appears to be a game entirely focused around battling. This isn't technically like a brand new idea from Pokemon, given that we did have like Battle Revolution and Pokemon Stadium many years ago, but it is certainly a new idea, at least in modern times. That being said, I think that Pokemon Champions is going to be very, very different. It's also new and exciting because it's doing something that has never been possible before, which is allowing players to battle on their phones as well as on their Switches. As far as I can tell, there seems to be cross-compatibility, but again, it's still pretty early. I would bet that there's cross-compatibility though. Okay, but if you don't care about Pokemon battles, then again, why does this matter? I think in order to answer this, we should think about why would Game Freak want to do this in the first place? Obviously, I don't work at Game Freak, and so I don't have like access to their, official reasoning or whatever, but I have given this a fair bit of thought, and there's some things that I realized after thinking about it more that didn't stand out to me as obvious at first. Right now, the way that Pokemon games are set up, the single player experience and the competitive player experience are closely tied together. Whenever they introduce a new mechanic such as Terrestrialization, Dynamax, Z-moves, Mega Evolution, these mechanics need to be fun for the single player, but they also have to be balanced around the competitive players. This balance is especially important because after a game's initial release window, after the initial hype has kind of died down, most of the marketing the game gets will be from some sort of competitive battles, often through Pokemon's own world championships and the other events in the circuit. So if a game is balanced really badly, that ends up actually making the Pokemon Company look bad and lazy, and they don't want that. But as I'm sure many of you know, most people who play through the game don't care at all about the competitive experience. So the game is basically forced to be optimized around something that only a very, very small percentage of players who actually play it will, experience. Beyond just balancing issues though, the competitive battles and the single player experience being, tied together in the same game actually really limits what you can do with the single player experience. For example, I played through Legends Arceus when it first released, and I had a great time with that game. I really enjoyed that you could catch Pokemon like outside of battle. I thought that was really neat, and a bunch of the other mechanical changes they liked as well. Didn't love strong and agile style, I didn't love everything, but in many ways it felt much more like a modern video game than kind of an updated Pokemon game. However, as you may recall, that game doesn't have player versus player battles because the battle system was optimized around making the single player gameplay fun to experience rather than being something that would actually work if you were to play against your friends. So imagine Game Freak had found a new style of allowing players to experience the single player gameplay, and everybody loved it, and it was pretty much just a strict upgrade, but it didn't work with the official competitive format. What would you do then? Well, if your new system didn't work with competitive battles, that would kind of put you in a tough situation, right? Like, of course, you could just cut competitive battles from the game, but that would be really bad for a number of reasons. I think people would not be happy with that. I'm biased, of course, but I think even other players, enjoy battling their friends. It would also be bad from a marketing angle. So you would reach the conclusion that you want to include player versus player battles in your game, but you wouldn't use a different system for the player versus player battles than you would for like the player versus, the environment battles, right? And so you wouldn't actually be able to update your system, even if you found something better. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the single player experience and the competitive player experience are actually pretty different, and they kind of require different things to be optimized and to feel good. And by separating these out into different games, the Pokemon Company is then able to have two different systems that they can work around to make the best that they can be, and they're able to make changes independently without them being directly tied to each other, while still having them be connected enough because you can send Pokemon between the games. Again, feel free to take this all with a grain of salt. This is just why I think they might have done this and why I think it actually might make sense and why I think it might actually be a good thing. If I can be honest, when I saw the trailer, initially I was actually pretty nervous because I was like, oh, this is a big change. Like, this is going to change things in a big way. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this actually could give Game Freak more control to make the game better. And of course, there's no guarantee that it will be better, but I do see the reasoning behind why they would give this a shot. So let's talk about impact. And again, just a reminder, there isn't that much actual information out, so this is my best guess based on what I think is likely to happen and what is likely to come from these games, but it could be totally off base, so, don't take it as fact. This is just what I think. I think that it is almost certain that official competitive Pokemon tournaments will take place in Pokemon Champions, perhaps indefinitely, depending on how they go. The reason I think this is because, this is a game totally built around battling, and so to not have your official tournaments use the battling simulator, to me seems like a missed opportunity, and also why are you doing it if that's the case? And I think this could be a really good thing. Just speaking personally for a second, on the one hand, this is kind of scary because this would be like a big change for competitive players. Like, we always have played in the newest mainline game, and so moving to a game that could exist in parallel to the mainline games, there's room for that to not go great for us, right? But at the same time, I think that having a dedicated environment just for battling could also lead to better rule sets, maybe actual balance patches, because right now, we don't get balance patches ever. Like, when a Pokemon is broken at the moment, it's just like, deal with it and find other Pokemon that can beat it. And so perhaps it would be easier to fine tune Pokemon that are overperforming, like a certain, fire type starter Pokemon, in an environment where it doesn't affect every single player who's just, playing through the game with their beloved kitten or whatever. Another upside of moving to a simulator is that, we don't know exactly how it's going to work, but it is very likely that the way in which you get Pokemon in game is going to be different. If the entire focus of the simulator is just to, battle with your Pokemon, then it is likely that getting good Pokemon to battle with will be easier than it is in the mainline games. And maybe this is far-fetched, but I think that it is not crazy to think that if the Pokemon Company is making their own battle simulator, that they are looking at the success of the existing Pokemon battle simulator that is unofficial, that being Pokemon Showdown. I'm sure the Pokemon Company isn't thrilled about Pokemon Showdown, but at the same time, it can't be denied just the impact that it's had. And frankly, it is the easiest way to battle against your friends or other strangers online because it's so easy to just boot it up, put in the Pokemon you want to use or play random battles and start battling. So it's possible that, of course, it's still a grind to get your Pokemon in Pokemon Champions, but personally, I doubt it. And if this is the case where you can kind of, just pick the Pokemon you want to use and not have to go through the trouble of breeding for the right IVs, giving them the right EVs, knocking out wild Pokemon to get the TRs that you want, I don't like that mechanic, then I think it could really lower the barrier to entry to a lot of players who would be interested in playing competitively, but are daunted by the idea of, going through all the trouble to get their team in game when they don't even know if it'll be good. In theory, a battle simulator could also add features that don't currently exist in any mainline game, such as the ability to intentionally lower one of your IVs, which can be a real cause for headaches at the moment, especially when you're dealing with legendary Pokemon. This is not an exaggeration. When I was preparing for Worlds, I needed to get a Calyrex Shadow, and it took me over 9 hours to get the Calyrex, and I got lucky. That's just to get one Pokemon, and I'm lucky that I had the time to do that, but not everybody does. Right now, we just don't know enough to say whether or not the battle simulator will just let you pick the Pokemon you want to use and, put in all the details and just be done with it right then and there. It very well could still be some kind of, process. Maybe you need to use resources that you get. We don't know anything, right? But it is very likely, in my opinion, that it'll be much faster and therefore it'll be much easier to get new people to give competitive a shot, which, as somebody who really cares about the growth of competitive Pokemon, I think is a good thing. One last thing that I want to say about accessibility is that it seems like, from what they've said, you can connect Pokemon Champions to Pokemon Home. So it seems all but confirmed that you'll be able to transfer in Pokemon that you've used in other Pokemon games and then be able to battle with them in Pokemon Champions. So if you have a Pokemon that's been your beloved partner since, Ruby and Sapphire, you'll still be able to battle with them in tournaments and against other players in Pokemon Champions. I suspect that this game has been in development for a little bit, but there is a more recent release that has had really resounding success that could, in theory, have influenced this title as well. I don't know for sure. Maybe it influenced its development, maybe it didn't, but regardless, I think it can tell us something about how this will perform. I am talking about Pokemon TCG Pocket. For those of you who don't know, Pokemon TCG Pocket is a mobile app which is effectively a simplified version of the Pokemon trading card game. Rather than having 6 prizes to choose from, you have 3 prizes, the Pokemon overall are a lot weaker, and the games are overall a lot faster. From what I can tell, Pokemon TCG Pocket appears to have been a resounding success, and I think it's working really well as a bridge between general Pokemon fans and people who are actually competing in trading card game tournaments. The trading card game is also at an all-time high right now in terms of popularity, and I don't think that's necessarily because it's seeing the benefits of TCG Pocket just yet, but I also don't imagine that it's hurting. If Pokemon Champions is good and it's easy to play and it's easy to kind of pick up and get into even if you don't have a background already in competitive battling, I think that it could spike competitive Pokemon's popularity in ways that I can't even really articulate because I can't even really fathom them. Part of the reason why I'm so excited for this game is because I think it's filling a need that we've had for a really long time. Back not that long ago during Sun and Moon, I'm talking 2017 to 2019, competitive Pokemon, especially official competitive Pokemon VGC, was not popular. Basically, most videos would cap out around 10,000 views on YouTube. And if you got 10,000 views, you're like, I did it. That's everybody who cares about competitive Pokemon. Good job, me. And part of the reason why competitive Pokemon was struggling so much during Sun and Moon is because there was no bridge. Pokemon as a franchise is extremely popular. It's the highest earning media franchise in the world. But all these people playing Pokemon had no idea that competitive Pokemon was even a thing. And in many ways, it was actually kind of hard to find information. There was nothing mentioned in the original games about it. And the official competitive format uses all double battles, whereas the single player experience is almost entirely single battles. So even though you had this huge existing player base and you had this, established competitive scene with tournaments, with prize money, with all these wonderful things about it, with broadcasts, there wasn't really a clear way to get people who cared about Pokemon to care about the competitive scene. With Pokemon Champions, that could totally change, especially if traditional player versus player Pokemon battles are taken out of the mainline Pokemon games and instead put directly into Pokemon Champions. In the battle footage that they showed of the game, it was a double battle, which again is the same format that we use in the official competitive format. Now, while we're on the topic of popularity, there is actually something that I'm pretty worried about and pretty concerned about when I think about this game and the impact that it could have. Pokemon tournaments at the moment have exploded in popularity. For context, tournaments used to struggle to get 100 entrants, and the tournament that I just went to last weekend had over 1,000. And that's a good thing, right? The game is growing, people are interested, but there are some logistical problems. The structure the tournaments use has had to change twice in the last 2 years already because the amount of players interested in playing has grown so much that the old tournament structures, which were built for fewer players, couldn't handle them. And tournaments at the moment are selling out in seconds, meaning that lots of people who would love to play just can't play. And of course you might think, well, just, open more slots. Come on, it's not that hard. But the problem is that the Pokemon Company is running these huge tournaments and they've booked venues sometimes years in advance. And if the game suddenly spikes in popularity, which currently it is already doing without this game, they aren't able to just, quickly change venue sizes or change venues. My suspicion is that the Pokemon Company is several years ahead of where they would have liked to be in a best case scenario, and that's actually causing some problems. That being said, there's nothing really that we can do about this. None of the fans can do anything. None of us creators can do anything about it. We kind of just have to hope that the Pokemon Company finds solutions. But for this tournament that I was at this past weekend, one of my best friends tried to sign up, was there the minute that registration opened and didn't get a slot. And there were over 1,000 slots and he didn't get in the first minute. So it's not necessarily something that is, cause for panic, but if the game really does explode, if we see even something similar to TCG Pocket and the impact that that's had, I think that it could become very difficult for people who want to play to actually play. Now, the trailer for Pokemon Champions didn't really show off that much specific information. It gave us a really good general feel for what the game would be, but it didn't have many specifics in it, which is why I've, really tried to preface a lot of this by saying this is my speculation. That being said, there was something extremely interesting that they did make sure to show off, and that was that there were two different generational mechanics present in the same battle. In the trailer, we see Charizard Mega Evolve to Charizard X, and we see Dondozo on the opposite side to Rastalize. This is very, very interesting. And frankly, I'm going to say that this isn't really speculation, because if you couldn't have battles with both Terastallization and Mega Evolution, I don't think that they would show it in the trailer. So we can assume that there will be multiple generational mechanics present in these battles, or at least that they have the option sometimes to use these generational mechanics in the same battles together. This is another advantage of having a game solely dedicated to just battling, where they're able to bring in older mechanics without it affecting the single player experience. I think it is somewhat likely that the other central mechanics of Z-moves and Dynamax also make a return as well, though again, it's just speculation. I think that this is a really, really cool concept. This is a huge advantage of having a game just dedicated to battling, where, there could be some rule sets where it's just Mega Evolution, or some rule sets where it's, just Terastallization, or some where it's Megas and Terastallization. But the other advantage in theory is that they're actually able to mess with the numbers a little bit and fine tune all of these mechanics to be somewhat comparable in power. In a vacuum, Dynamax was the strongest mechanic because it doubled your HP and gave you a huge boost to your power, but maybe in this simulator they could change it to be, I don't know, a 30% increase to your HP and a 20% increase to your power, just throwing out random numbers, right? Something that gets it more in line with a Mega Evolution. It's possible that, multiple Pokemon in your team can be affected by, multiple of these mechanics, but it's also possible that you would have to choose each battle, whether you're going to Mega Evolve, whether you're going to Terastallize, Dynamax, or use a Z-move, or that you can mix and match. I think that this really opens up some interesting gameplay, and with all these different mechanics and all the different combinations, I think it could keep the game really fresh, having access to all these different tools that you would never have all of them in one mainline game when they are balanced correctly. And when you think about rotating in Pokemon and rotating in mechanics and out Pokemon, maybe you ban legendaries for one season, maybe you only have, Z moves for one season, whatever, I think the game could stay really fresh for a really long time, even if there aren't new Pokemon being added. Of course, there was one line in the trailer that is kind of related to this, which is that they said that not all Pokemon would be available in this game, at least at first. There might be some people who are concerned about this, like, yeah, not all Pokemon are going to be in the game, at release at least, but I don't think this is inherently a problem. Counterintuitively, having more Pokemon present in a competitive format actually decreases diversity, because when you get certain Pokemon that are just so strong, they end up crowding out a lot of the weaker Pokemon. For example, Pokemon like Scrafty and Hitmontop, who used to be really effective Pokemon, have basically seen zero usage once Incineroar was released. And there's actually a lot of Pokemon that having Incineroar in a game just kind of crowds out. I'm sure that eventually most Pokemon will be added to Pokemon Champions. I mean, I'm not sure, but I would suspect. But I think it's actually a good thing if Game Freak considers curating the rule sets to make them more interesting for competitive players, rather than just being like, here's every Pokemon, like enjoy Landorus, enjoy Incineroar, enjoy Calyrex. If you're upset about not every Pokemon being in the game, I totally get it. I understand people want to use their favorites. But for me personally, I think that the idea that they are willing to not just put every Pokemon in is actually a good thing, at least for enjoying competitive play. I'm sure also, just like the mainline games, that they will always be adding more Pokemon in, so that by the time it's been out for a little bit, I'm sure a vast majority of the Pokemon will be present. But again, that is speculation. Perhaps the only Pokemon legal will be, electric types, and we'll have to play a really weird format. One big elephant in the room is monetization. And this is one that I think is interesting, but unfortunately, I don't really have anything to say, I think. It is likely that the game will try and make money, whether that's through a one-time purchase, whether it's through, Nintendo's online features, which I'm pretty sure you'll have to pay for that. I can't imagine otherwise. Whether it's through, maybe you have to like, I don't know, buy the ability to make your Pokemon stronger. I don't know, right? I think it is likely that the game will be monetized in some way, and I have no idea whether or not that will feel predatory, whether or not that will feel, exploitative. I don't imagine that it will be pay to win, personally. It might be pay to save time in a worst case scenario, but I do think that generally it seems like people have felt that the monetization policies in Pokemon's mobile games are not the worst out there. Like, I know TCG Pocket, there's a lot of ways that you can effectively play for free. And with Pokemon Unite, which is the other big example that I'm familiar with, I think a lot of the game you can accomplish via grinding. Like, of course, it will take a little bit more time, but I don't think it's like a crazy example. And a lot of the purchases that you can make are for cosmetics. It would be really funny if, we had cosmetics for Pokemon in official battles. I'm not sure if that will happen. I really have no idea. What I will say is that I am tentatively optimistic about this. I'm sure that you will have to pay some for it, but I also don't really mind. Like, I would pay for a Pokemon game anyway. That's my opinion. I have some faith that they won't have super predatory monetization practices, but we have no information about this. So, like, with the other ones, I felt like I had educated guesses. With this, I've got nothing. So, we'll have to see. The last thing that I want to talk about before we wrap up here is the impact that this could have. Obviously, a lot of this video has been speculative, right? And I don't normally like speculative content, but because this is such a monumental announcement, I felt like I should talk a little bit and try to give what I hope has been, level-headed, realistic expectations based on what we know right now. Very well could be off the mark, but this is just my best guess at being reasonable. But I want to take a second and kind of talk about what this could mean. Of course, it's possible the game flops and nobody plays it, and it's just kind of a flash in the pan. But I think that this could be a real turning point for Pokemon going forward. In a perfect scenario, I think it is totally possible that the existence of this game not only makes competitive play drastically better, but also makes the single player experience better as well. More than that, I think that this game could be a really, really good and needed gateway to introduce people to how wonderful it is to battle with competitive Pokemon. Speaking personally, Pokemon tournaments have just straight up changed my life. Even before I was doing YouTube, getting to meet so many incredible people traveling around the world, it's not an exaggeration to say that it really did change my life. And I don't think that I'm the only one. I think many of us who play competitively feel similarly about the impact that this game has had. Part of the reason why I feel so motivated to make YouTube videos in the first place is because I feel like I was so lucky to have this chance to have these incredible experiences, and I want other people to at least know that they're out there if they're interested. So for me, I think that this game is a really, really great thing, and I think that it could really help to introduce more people to this world, which I love so dearly. Also, it's just really crazy to see how far this scene has grown. When I first started playing, there were like 350 people who played competitive Pokemon global. Like that was it. That was the entire global player base. And now, I mean, it could be in the hundreds of thousands who are playing in some way, shape, or form. A game like this existing back when I first started would have been unthinkable. Like if you came in and you were like, hey guys, Pokemon's gonna make a battle simulator, you would have been laughed out the door. So it's really cool to be living in a time where, yeah, I mean, it's not a joke anymore. Like it's coming, it's happening. I'm trying to have level expectations. We don't know very much about this beyond the fact that it's coming. There's lots of things that could change. It could be bad. And yet, despite that, this feels like one of those moments where, at least for me, this is a game that could actually legitimately change my life. Like this could be a before Pokemon Champions and after Pokemon Champions kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. And I guess I can just say that I'm really, really eager to see what they come out with and to learn more information. That's most of what I wanted to say. The last thing that I will say is this is my Wolfey prediction. Okay, this is now, I saved this till the end because it's purely speculative. Okay, this is, I'm putting my tinfoil hat on and this feels a little less grounded than everything else that I've said. But here's my thought. Okay, here's my prediction. Normally there's a new Pokemon game every 3 years. However, during the direct today, they didn't say anything about Generation 10, which means effectively we can expect Scarlet and Violet to last for at least 1 year longer than it would normally, running for 4 years rather than 3. The problem is they are quickly running out of formats to do with Scarlet and Violet. So my tinfoil hat theory is that we're going to play one more World Championships in Scarlet and Violet, and then in the 4th year, before Generation 10 comes out, Pokemon Champions will come out, and then we'll play one World Championship in Pokemon Champions before Generation 10, maybe 2, depending on when it comes out. That's my theory. Anyway, thanks for watching. I know this was a different kind of video than I normally do, but I wanted to talk about Pokemon Champions because I just think it's so monumental. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Back to regularly scheduled, more edited content.